Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. One of the areas that I have always been most interested in my Judaism has been when two competing forces face each other, which one has more power? I can think of hundreds of different examples to give to you, some from the Jewish tradition, some from life. But I'm always fascinated when two competing forces are fighting with each other, which one trumps? What's more powerful, a disinfectant or an infectant? Something that causes disease or something that can stop it? In Judaism, what do we do when two competing laws are facing off with each other? Is there a hierarchy of laws? Does one matter more than the other? For years, I've been interested in this, and sadly, this congregation has had to suffer through my example on many a Shabbat of going through these different cases of where two competing laws face one another and how we choose which one matters more. Here's a classic example that's given from the Mishnah. Judaism thinks that marriage is a very important mitzvah. And if someone is walking on the street on their way to go get married, which is a mitzvah, and someone stops that person and says, hey, we have 9 people for a minyan. You would be the 10th person so that they could say Kaddish. We need you for the minyan. And by going to the minyan, the person would be late for his own wedding. The rabbis tell us this is a conundrum. And the rabbis tell us that they are allowed to forsake one for the other. They can tell the minyan, I can't participate in that mitzvah without any penalty or punishment, either from God or from the community, because they're already involved in doing another mitzvah. The concept in tradition is called ha'osek b'mitzvah pator min mitzvah. One who's engaged in one commandment is exempt from the other commandment. The other example that I give all the time is that when someone dies in Judaism, we have a responsibility to sit with the deceased until they're buried. They're called a shomer, a watcher. And the idea is that out of respect for the deceased, they should never be left alone. We also know in Judaism that it's forbidden to pray in front of the dead. It's called loeg larash, and it's tantamount to saying, look what I can do and you can't. I can pray and you can't. So as a result of that, what we do is we don't pray in front of the dead. But we know that observant Jews pray 3 times a day. So if we're tasked with the responsibility of watching the dead, and we're also tasked with the responsibility of praying 3 times a day, what do? Do we watch the dead and skip our prayer? Or do we skip watching the dead and do we pray? These are the kinds of questions in Judaism that I find fascinating, because what it does is it creates an internal hierarchy. It reminds us of which prayers and which activities and which mitzvot seem to matter a little bit more than the others. Which ones do we give priority to, and which one wins out when they are in conflict with one another? As I say to my kids, it's not a hard choice when choosing Twizzlers or broccoli. But it becomes more challenging when choosing broccoli or green beans. And in Judaism, when you put these two competing things against each other, what do? The reason I share, again, this concept with all of you is because I am fascinated and I am flummoxed by the following question. Do we, as a Jewish state, have the moral responsibility to provide aid to the people of Gaza? It is the exact same paradigm, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we have to look hard. I don't think we have to stretch. I don't think we have to unpack obscure texts to find where our responsibility is when we see someone who is hungry and to feed them. Maimonides tells the most compelling example of this, that if a Jewish person walks down the street and sees someone hungry and doesn't do something to help nourish them, whether it's give them money or give them food, it is tantamount to idol worship. That's what Maimonides says. That's how important it is to take care of someone who is in need. So what we are saying is that as a Jewish state, we have a moral responsibility and incumbency to provide aid to the starving people of Gaza. And let me take it a step further that's not really on Jewish texts. These 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, even 20-year-olds, they were born into a crappy fate. They didn't choose this fate, their ancestors did. And they did from generation to generation. Now, ultimately, it will be up to them to change that fate. But so far, not one generation in the last 80 years has. But do we punish them for the mistakes of their ancestors? Should that be their responsibility? Should they go hungry for those choices in which they made to stay in perpetual conflict with their neighbors in Israel? I don't think it's a very hard stretch for us to find that responsibility to feed the hungry. And there's another side. And that other side is as follows. What if feeding the hungry is tantamount to feeding the cancer that is coming to ravage your body and soul? Because by feeding the hungry, you are in essence feeding your literal enemy who is sworn to your destruction, who has demonstrated what they will do to bring about your destruction, who is committed and unwavering in your destruction, and who will continue to have energy to destroy you. In essence, by continuing to feed your enemy, you are fueling them to help destroy you. That's against Jewish law. We can't do anything that causes our destruction, our hurt, our pain. So what do? Do we have a moral obligation and imperative to not feed the people of Gaza for that very reason, knowing how it's going to be used and manipulated? It's not a secret in any rational and reasonable group that the overwhelming majority of Gazans, we're not talking 51 or 62, we're talking 85 to 95% of the people living in Gaza are 100% behind the attacks of October the 7th and are unwavering in it. These are not a people who believe in two states for two people. These are not a people who are extending their hand in peace and prosperity and opportunity. They are a people who have learned through indoctrination of years that Israel is a cancer and they have a responsibility to eradicate that cancer and to bring Islam to the greater world. That is Hamas's charter. It's not about the state or creating different barriers and borders. It's about our very existence. And to take it a step further, any historians in this room will be hard-pressed to find examples of when the Americans went out of their way to feed the Japanese and the Germans as we were busy bombing Dresden. They would have to work really hard to see how it is that we fed all of the children and the adults in Korea in the 50s, or what we did to ensure that the Vietnamese stayed strong as we continued to fight them. In some ways, it's ridiculous that in the history of warfare, that we are the only people and only nation that has as a moral incumbency that will otherwise have them ostracized in the court of public opinion and in the literal international court for not feeding the very enemy that is sworn to its destruction. And every time we do, the result of it is tangible. What do I mean by that? As someone who follows this very closely, every time Israel removes itself from major cross points in Gaza in the last 20 months, every time that Israel brings in more aid, inevitably there are rockets that are fired to Sderot from Gaza. Now, luckily, we have Iron Dome, and it has a high capture rate of 90%, and most of these are ineffective, and we have taken away the vast majority of their arsenal and their ability to inflict pain. But even so, after 20 months, what is their innate reaction? Not one of, please bring more rice and pita, not one of appreciation or gratitude, but one that says, let's take this small envelope not to make sure our kids are okay that haven't been fed in 2 months, or to make sure that our kids can continue with math and reading because they haven't had school in 20 months. But let's take this envelope and let's fire rockets. And let's do it from a school or a playground so that if those rocket launchers are removed, we can claim the Israelis are firing upon schools, hospitals, and playgrounds. For Hamas, it's a win-win. For Israel, it's a lose-lose. So I ask you, what do we do? I don't really care what CNN or Fox News says we should do. What do we do? What do we do as Jewish moral people? Do we bring aid in, knowing that we are giving more breath to Hamas to refuel and re-energize to continue in their war against us? Do we know that we give them more time and more leverage to continue holding 58 hostages, some of them breathing, living souls who have not been visited once in 20 months by the International Red Cross? They have not been afforded any international rights that are part of the rules of warfare. And perhaps by continuing to not feed the people of Gaza, we could yield 2 results. One is we could literally and figuratively suffocate the Gazans so deeply that they are forced, in order to have food, to release the living hostages and perhaps the dead ones as well, so that they can be buried properly. And then we might even be successful in exiling all of Hamas so that Israel doesn't have to live with its sworn enemy on this border. Maybe that's a moral incumbency also. I'm reminded of a Jewish text that talks about 2 people that are stranded in the forest. And there's only enough water for one of them to survive. If they both drink from the small canteen that's there, they will not be nourished enough and both of them will die. If one of them drinks, that one will survive and the other will die. What does the tradition tell us to do? Jewish tradition tells us we should drink, meaning our survival is paramount. It doesn't mean that we don't have empathy for the person who can't drink. It doesn't say that, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't even imply that. But it does say that we should drink and choose life. Amongst a lot of my social orbit, there are people who are losing their patience with Israel's war on Hamas and Gaza. They thought it was a just war on October 8th, and then they dealt with it in February of 2024. But now, 20 months later, they're tired. They're fatigued. They don't want the war anymore. They don't want to keep going. They don't want to have to fight off public opinion. And they think that what we're doing in Gaza is absolutely unnecessary. And the other thing that bothers them is they have felt that we are a moral and just people, and now we're behaving in a way that doesn't translate to moral justness. My answer to those people are, I hear you. I especially hear the part about dealing with the moral injustice of children who are starving. No one wants to see those pictures. And what people do when we see those pictures is we assign blame. Most people in the world see a starving Gazan child and they say, that's the fault of Israel because they're not letting the aid in. And in some ways, that's kind of true, but not really. You see, I look at it through a totally different lens. A lens that can easily hold the truth that say, I hate seeing that child starving. It is not fair. I want to nourish that child. But if I want to assign blame for that starving child, it falls squarely and unequivocally on the shoulders of Hamas and those that continue to promote and support Hamas, and not on Israel choosing to bring in aid or not bring in lives. This was a process where aid trucks came in every single day. every single day on October the 6th and before. This was a process where before October the 7th, thousands of Palestinians living in Gaza would cross the border and come and work in all of the kibbutz communities that they then infiltrated. This is a process that took it away through the choice of Hamas and fully aware of what the repercussions would be. So as observant Jews, as thoughtful Jews, as careful Jews, as moral Jews, what do you advise the prime minister to do? What do you advise the leadership to do? What do you tell the people at the water cooler about the starving children in Gaza? That is undoubtedly a travesty. I'm reminded of a woman I met by the name of Rotem, a single mother with 2 children who lived in the village of Kfar Aza that is less than a kilometer away from Gaza. I have visited her home many times since October 7th. Rotem is an amateur photographer, which made her a kindred spirit to me. She has 2 beautiful young children, and she was really into this notion of photography, and she had worked with an Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, Gazan photographer on a program called Pictures for Peace. This photographer and she had built a relationship over years, and they had taken pictures both in Israel and in Gaza, where they were going to share these pictures in the hopes of building bridges of what a future could be. On October 7th, when Rotem and her 2 children were locked in their safe room of their home, hearing gunfire around them, smelling smoke, knowing that there was danger and a serious infiltration and rockets flying overhead, Rotem received a phone call from this Gazan, Palestinian, Muslim man that she had worked with for years on this photography program. And the person asked, Rotem, where are you? And she said, I'm at home. And he said, where in your home are you? And she said, I'm in the safe room. And he said, is the IDF there yet? And she instantly realized that he wasn't asking about her welfare. He was either working for Hamas or manipulated to work for Hamas. And as she said, it really doesn't matter. And all of that trust and hope and relationship burned to ashes, just like her home eventually did. So I ask her, do we have a moral obligation to extend a hand in peace? Do we have a responsibility, according to Jewish ethics, to say, I believe in tomorrow? Cut our losses and build up bigger walls and deny food to an entire group of people in the hopes that their evil, that their cancer will suffocate, that our hostages will come home, and that we can rebuild and begin again, more aware of the stark reality. If you ask me, there are countless things that happened on October 7th that were horrible and cruel. The rape of young women, the attack of the concert at the Nova Festival, taking people from their beds and their homes, kidnapping Holocaust victims. But to me, the most criminal thing that has happened, the most sinister thing that Hamas has done, is they have put us in a predicament, a conundrum again, that is unsolvable, that is incurable, that we are damned if we do and we are damned if we don't, in whichever direction we choose. If we provide aid, it could lead to furthering our demise and continuing an everlasting war. And if we deny aid, well, then we could be seen as immoral and heartless and watching as people starve and transgressing the very teaching of Maimonides. And the crime is putting those 2 losing choices in front of us. It's cruel, it's horrific, and it's wrong. And for people that land on either side, I hear them and I see them. And I hope that we can all find the place to understand those, even if we're not on their side. In some magical way, I pray that the innocent be nourished, that the guilty be malnourished and starve, and we drain out the oxygen of those that seek to harm our people, and that hand of peace can be extended, and we can trust it, and we can build a bridge to our future, because we need it now more than ever. Shabbat shalom, everyone.